All right, so let's jump right into this. We're talking about potential labor issues in Major League Baseball today. Specifically, the chance of a lockout after the 2026 season. We've got an MLB Trade Rumors article here from March 3rd, 2025, along with, of course, some really interesting fan reaction. So think of this like, your crash course before you head to that next baseball meetup with your friends. We're going to get you ready to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure. I mean, even the commissioner, Rob Manfred, has come out and said that he thinks a lockout could be, well, a positive thing.
Yeah.
He even used a kind of striking analogy. He compared it to a .22 caliber in the whole negotiation process.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty loaded comparison. Why would he try to spin a lockout, something that could really disrupt the season and tick off fans as a good thing?
It all comes down to leverage.
Yeah.
Think of it this way, right?
Mm.
When you're negotiating during the off-season, there's a completely different kind of pressure than if you were, trying to work things out in the middle of the season when games are being played. Manfred even said that having that time is super important for the economics of the game to actually, evolve, especially with all these local media deals that are always changing. He's definitely thinking long-term here.
So it's like he's calling a strategic timeout, letting the owners kind of set the pace and the terms.
Yeah, you could see it that way.
But what about the players? How are they feeling about Manfred's, let's call it optimism, about a potential lockout?
Well, Tony Clark, the head of the MLBPA, he did not hold back. He straight up called a lockout a weapon being used against the players and their families.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a very different perspective.
That is a huge contrast. You've got Manfred talking about, leverage and economics, and then you have Clark bringing up the potential impact on real people. Seems like we're already seeing a bit of a battle over the narrative here.
Right, and then there's Matt Chapman, the Giants' third baseman. He had a more cynical view of it all. He basically said that Manfred's comments are all just tactics, just a way to try and control the story. It's a chess match, each side trying to outmaneuver the other.
So whose turn is it now? What's the big issue that's probably going to cause the most friction? I'm willing to bet it's the same thing that seems to come up every single time these negotiations happen.
You are absolutely right. The salary cap, or I guess the lack of one, that's going to be the main event. Owners like David Rubenstein of the Orioles are very open about wanting a cap in place to, manage costs and create a more even playing field.
Which makes sense from a business standpoint, right? But the players, at least through Tony Clark, have always pushed back against that idea. Clark's argument is that a salary cap isn't actually needed for competitive balance or even for the sport to grow. He even said something about wanting to shift revenue from one side to the other.
Yeah.
Which to me sounds a little bit like, well, a power struggle more than anything else.
You're right. It really makes you think, is this all about the money? Or is there something, deeper going on here? A difference in philosophy, maybe? Who gets to be in control? Who makes the final calls?
It's interesting because their article mentioned that MLB hasn't really had a true dynasty in quite a while.
Yeah.
There haven't been any back-to-back World Series champs since the Yankees, way back in '98 to 2000. And they even pointed out the huge gap in payroll between teams like the Dodgers, spending almost $400 million, and the Marlins, who only spend $70 million.
Right.
Yet both of those teams have the same number of World Series titles over the last 35 years.
Yeah, that really throws a wrench in the argument that a salary cap is necessary for competitive balance. If teams with drastically different payrolls can still be just as successful, then what does that really say about whether a cap would actually work?
It does kind of suggest that other factors are more important, right?
Yeah.
Things like, smart management, good player development, maybe even just a little bit of luck. It's not as easy as saying a big payroll automatically equals winning championships.
Exactly. And the article talked about some other things that have been tried to help, like revenue sharing, giving teams in smaller markets some advantages in the draft. Plus, you have teams like the Rays, the Guardians, the Brewers that are always competitive without spending a ton of money.
And of course, MLB made record revenue last year. Over $12 billion.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're hurting for cash. And with that pitch clock thing seeming to help boost the sport's popularity, does the salary cap even seem necessary at this point?
It's complicated for sure, but hey, let's see what the fans have to say, right? Their perspective on this whole salary cap thing is super important.
Oh, absolutely. The fans are the ones who are filling the stadiums, buying the merchandise, creating the demand that makes this whole thing possible.
Okay, so let's dive into those fan comments and see what they think about this potential lockout and this battle brewing over the salary cap.
Wow, some of these fan comments you sent are really all over the place. Like this one belongs to the Reds. He says he has some inside info and is already predicting a long work stoppage.
Yeah, he says the owners are already getting ready for it.
That's kind of worrisome. It makes you wonder if all that talk about a lockout being positive is more than just, talk.
Right. It definitely makes you think about how much the fans will actually put up with.
Yeah.
Will their love for the game survive a really long break, or could a lockout actually make people just, like, not care anymore?
Yeah.
Some fans, like the Raven here, seem to be okay with the break. He even jokes that he needs one to get some stuff done.
Right.
But how many people actually feel that way?
Exactly. And then you've got these more intense reactions like never remember who calls the owners leeches on society.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty strong words. They're arguing that the players deserve a much bigger piece of the revenue.
That definitely shows how some fans feel like things are unfair. Like, the players are the ones out there on the field making the game exciting, but they're getting taken advantage of.
Right. And then, of course, we have the classic small market versus large market debate.
Yeah.
Gino Seligbury points out that not every team owner could afford to shell out money like the Yankees and the Dodgers.
Right.
But then PDX Brew Crew comes back and argues that those big spending teams actually use a smaller percentage of their revenue on salaries than many other teams.
That's really interesting. It shows how fans kind of make assumptions about how teams manage their money, right?
Yeah.
JT70 goes even further and suggests that owners who are struggling should just sell their teams.
Wow.
And they even suggest having a salary floor instead of a cap.
Oh, a salary floor? How does that work again?
So basically, a salary floor sets a minimum amount that teams have to spend on players. It prevents them from doing that whole, tanking thing where they intentionally put together a cheap, bad team just to get better draft picks in the future.
Oh, I see. So instead of trying to limit how much the top teams spend, it forces the bottom teams to spend more.
Exactly.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and it really gets at the heart of what fans want. They want every team to try and win.
Right.
To have a truly competitive league.
Dewey Belongson Hall had a really interesting suggestion. They said there should be a system that rewards teams for signing their own players to long-term contracts.
Oh, interesting.
So it would encourage teams to focus on developing their own talent instead of just relying on free agency. But then you have fans like Acos1331 who are, well, doubtful.
Yeah.
They point to powerful owners like Jerry Reinsdorf of the White Sox who are likely to resist that kind of change.
If the owners can't even agree among themselves, it's hard to see how they're going to reach a deal with the players, right?
Exactly. Carver Andrews makes a really good point, too. They say there's no fan representation in these negotiations at all.
Yeah.
Fans are what make the game what it is. They're the lifeblood of the sport, but it also feels like their voices aren't even being heard.
It's true. Fans are paying for tickets, often helping to pay for those stadiums, but they have zero say in the decisions that shape the future of the game.
Yeah. It's a bit frustrating, isn't it?
Carver Andrews also brought up the whole issue of transparency, or the lack of it, I should say, when it comes to how much money the owners are actually making. We always hear about how much players are getting paid, but how much are the owners taking home? That's never really discussed, is it?
GBS 42 and John C. countered that, though. They say it's the owners who are setting those salaries in the first place, that it's the market that determines how much a player is worth.
Right.
And they argue that fans shouldn't be mad at the players for just trying to get what they deserve.
It's a good reminder that this is a very complicated system with a lot of different people involved, all with their own goals and interests. Mike127 even pointed out that some teams, like the Cubs under Jed Hoyer, seem to be managing their payroll with this labor uncertainty in mind, like they're already thinking ahead to what might happen.
So they're already playing that chess game, trying to anticipate the consequences of a potential lockout.
Exactly. And then you have fans like Thornton Mellon who say they'd be willing to give up an entire season if it meant making sure baseball stays healthy in the long run.
Now that's dedication.
It shows how much fans really care about the future of the game, But there are also fans like 66, the number of the best, who think MLB should adopt a system like the NFL, the MEA, or the NHL, where players get a guaranteed percentage of the league's revenue.
Right.
They even highlight the fact that MLB players only get about 39% of the revenue, while players in those other leagues get something closer to 50%.
Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. It definitely gives the players more ammunition when they argue for a fairer system, one where they actually benefit from the league's success.
Right.
But then Heineken brings up a really tricky problem that's unique to MLB. A lot of teams now own their own TV networks.
Oh, right.
So it's hard to figure out the true value of those media rights, which could make it a lot harder to create a revenue-sharing system like those other leagues have.
Yeah, yeah.
It really seems like there are no easy solutions here.
No, definitely not. And that's part of what makes this whole situation so interesting and honestly kind of scary because there's so much uncertainty. And then, of course, we have that bombshell from Websole Surfer about the MLBPA supposedly having a $2.3 billion fund set aside to support players during a lockout.
Oh, wow.
If that's true, that could completely change everything. Imagine the power the players would have if they knew they could handle a long lockout.
It would definitely give them a huge advantage in the negotiations. Owners might be a lot less willing to dig in their heels on certain issues if they knew the players could hold out for a long time.
Absolutely. So now it's not just about who has the better arguments, it's about who has more money and can afford to wait it out. It's like a high-stakes poker game, and unfortunately, it's the fans who could end up losing the most.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget sometimes that even though we love baseball, it's still a business at the end of the day. And sometimes those business decisions don't really align with what the fans want.
Right. So here we are. Manfred seems pretty okay with a lockout. Clark is warning the players that a lockout is like an attack on them, and this whole salary cap issue is looming over everything.
Yeah, and let's not forget about the fans, who are super invested in the outcome, but often feel like they don't have any control over what happens. It feels like things could get really messy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It definitely feels like we're headed for a showdown.
Okay, so where do we even go from here? You know, we've got Manfred basically saying he's fine with the lockout. We've got Clark telling the players it's basically an attack on them. And this whole salary cap thing is still hanging over everyone's heads.
Yeah, and the fans are right there in the middle, super passionate about baseball, but feeling like they have no say in what happens.
It really makes you think about how complex pro sports really are. You know, it's not just about what happens on the field. It's a business. It's a huge part of our culture. It's something that people get really emotional about.
And there is so much money involved. We're talking billions of dollars. These decisions they're making, they're going to affect baseball for years to come.
That $2.3 billion fund the players might have, that really changes things. Like, what if the players know they can survive a long lockout? How does that change the whole negotiation?
It would give them a ton of leverage. If the owners knew that, I might not be so stubborn about certain things. They might be more willing to compromise.
So it's not just about who has the better argument anymore. It's about who has enough money to just wait it out. It's like a really risky poker game. And it feels like the fans are the ones who could get hurt the most.
It's true. At the end of the day, no matter how much we love baseball, it's still a business. And those business decisions sometimes just don't care about what the fans want.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to accept. But that's just how it is with pro sports. So as we head into this new chapter in MLB's labor story, I guess the big question is this. Will they find a way to make a deal? Or are we going to have another huge fight?
I guess we'll have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure, the future of the sport is on the line here.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into this potential MLB lockout and all this drama surrounding it. We talked about Manfred's point of view, Clark's reaction, and what the fans are saying. You know, some are ready for a battle, some just want it to be over.
Right. We talked about the whole salary cap debate, what that huge player fund could mean, and how hard it's going to be to make everyone happy.
It feels like everything's in place, the players are ready, and time is running out. It's going to be an interesting few years for baseball, and we'll be here to break it all down for you as it happens.
Absolutely. Until then, keep those scorecards close, keep watching the games, and hey, maybe brush up on your negotiating skills, just in case.
Good advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep that love for baseball going.